So thank you everybody again for joining today's session. This is the fourth talk in the Paula Kantor seminar series. There was one by Jill, Monica, and Michael, and now it is Emily's turn. Thank you very much for delivering this talk today. You will be talking about women empowerment and food security in Zimbabwe and Kenya. Afterwards, it will be followed by discussion, especially the comments and suggestions by Agnes, and as usual, like in the previous talk. The floor is yours, Emily. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Vijesh. Hi, everyone. Yeah, welcome to today's meeting. My name is Emily, and I'll be presenting on behalf of other co-authors listed in this slide. And my topic of presentation is on women empowerment and food security in Zimbabwe and Kenya. This is still work in progress, so your feedback will be valuable in improving the paper. This is the outline of my presentation, where I will start by a brief background information to motivate the study, and then I will highlight the objectives, also describe the study area, the data, the preliminary results, and then conclude. The data we use in this paper is part of the On-Farm Select project, where we are aiming at improving genetic gain for grain yield and other traits preferred by farmers on farm in the selected breeding pipelines, especially in Kenya and Zimbabwe. So Jill talked about this project before, and today my focus will be only on women empowerment and food security. So food insecurity and lack of women empowerment are still development challenges. And for food insecurity, even though most of the countries, apart from sub-Saharan Africa, have made effort in reducing food insecurity, this is still a concern in sub-Saharan Africa. According to the FAO report for last year, the status of food and nutrition security in the world, we see that around 3/4 of the population in sub-Saharan Africa are still food insecure, moderately to severe food insecure. And around 1/4 of the population, they're experiencing undernourishment. And around 1/3 of the population, they're experiencing severe food insecurity. And there's also a gender gap in severe food insecurity at around 2 percentage points, where adult women are more disadvantaged. And the food insecurity is likely to be a concern even in the future because of the increasing population, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, and also for the multiple shocks that we are experiencing on climate, conflicts, and also economic shocks. And for lack of women empowerment and gender inequality, there are also still development challenges. We have them in the SDG goals, goal number 5, but also in agriculture and food system interventions, they are goals in themselves. And there's a consensus that women play a crucial role in food systems, and they are active actors and contributors when it comes to agri-food system, but oftentimes their work is overlooked and undervalued, and they are not appreciated. And with the increasing feminization of agriculture, where men are leaving agriculture for other preferences for other type of jobs here in Kenya, we see so many men, young adults and also older adults in the villages going for this border transport business, and they spend most of the time on this business, and farming is left for women. Also, you find that most men are also migrating from rural areas to urban areas within countries and also outside the countries to look for other type of employment, leaving women in agriculture. So women are contributing to farming in their own households and also working as laborers in other people's fields because they need food for their kids. And despite their roles, there are also gender gaps, especially in land and asset ownership, also in access to agricultural inputs, advisory services, and credit, which hinder actually inclusive and socioeconomic development. And most of this is because of the cultural norms and that hinder women from owning especially land, which is an important asset in most of the communities in sub-Saharan Africa. And this hinders them from making strategic decisions because they cannot access credit because of lack of collateral. They cannot participate in other economic activities. And this makes them more susceptible to food insecurity. So the challenge is, how do we make agriculture attractive for women? As much as they're playing a crucial role, how do they benefit from this? Because agriculture is also, I would say, it requires a lot of labor. If women are working in agriculture alone, or no, it's more of a manual kind of job if you don't have mechanization. And also this has some health implications. So bridging these gaps by empowering women and transforming gender norms, it takes quite some time to transform gender norms, which are the main limitation to achieving gender equality and empowering women. But having communities in conversation about gender norms and also including both men, women, and other stakeholders in this discussion, it's a starting point and can help actually bridge some of the gaps in agricultural productivity of male and female managed plots, and also other household welfare, income and security, and also child nutrition. So there is some literature, quite a bit of literature that has been done on women empowerment and food security. So the two terms are multidimensional. There are several dimensions, and people focused on different dimensions of women empowerment and food insecurity. So I try to tabulate, based on their findings, because some were focusing on different dimensions. Most of them use the Women Empowerment in Agriculture Index, where we have the aggregate Women Empowerment Index, and also the subdomain indicators, which are also quite useful. So most of the studies, they found that there's a positive link of women empowerment indicators on individual food security level, especially for women and children. And by food security, I also included nutritional indicators, dietary quality, as well as the anthropometric measures such as height for age z-scores, weight for age z-scores, and weight for height z-scores. So the first column is for those studies that are focusing on women and children. The last study actually focuses on women empowerment in agriculture, on food security and dietary quality, especially for the whole life course. So it details, apart from women and children, what about the teens and also the adult male. So this is just part of some of the studies in the first. They also focused on some of the things that have lighted in the second. And here, most of the findings is no or negative effect of women empowerment on adult body mass index. And some of the indicators of women dimensions that contribute to this are highlighted: autonomy, a workload, and also group and credit indicators in the last study, which has a negative effect on male body mass index. And some studies also found at household level a positive link of women empowerment on household food security, using different measures, whether subjective or objective, such as calorie availability, food expenditure budget, or per capita consumption, or even experience-based household food security measures. They found that women empowerment positively was associated with food security. Some also found a negative link. The first study especially found that participation of women in joint and sole decision-making was negatively associated with food security. And the next study looked at used mixed method, and on the quantitative finding, they did not find an effect. And the last column, I show those studies that found a positive effect on maize productivity and adoption of improved varieties. So we can see a couple of studies that have shown that indeed there is some effect of women empowerment on food security and agricultural productivity, but the mechanisms through which these effects occurs are not fully understood. Some of them, they do not go further to explain this. And some of the authors here, they indicate that the mechanisms are usually complex and not understood. Njuki tries to show a framework for gendered agri-food systems, but it's also complex and structured in the structural gender inequalities And empowerment is actually an outcome, but there's another study that was conducted here in Kenya, where they looked at women empowerment in agriculture and high yields. They highlighted some of the pathways in agriculture that can lead this is improved technologies, agronomic practices, and labor use. So we anticipate that women who are empowered are able to use improved technologies, good agronomic practices, and labor. And this will lead to crop productivity, which then will have an effect which will increase food availability for the household and also surpluses for sale. And this will lead to improved food security. So the research objective here is to investigate the association between women empowerment and food security, including maize yield in dual adult households. And the second objective is to highlight the determinants of women empowerment. We contribute to literature because there are few studies that have been conducted in Kenya. And in Zimbabwe, I came only across one, perhaps there are others, but they also focused on male and female headed households, and there are few studies in the maize farming context. So our study area, maize, is actually an important staple crop where around 85% of the population consume it, and the average per capita consumption is quite high in both countries. And most of the producers are smallholder farmers, here in Kenya especially. And most of the produce is used for home consumption with surpluses for sale, but even some of the smallholder who sell, they come back to buy within the season, within the next season. So it's more a kind of a distress sale, but we also have some large scale, a small number that grow it for commercial. In Zimbabwe, I think they also have quite a number of large scale farmers. And there is evidence that women actually play significant roles also in maize production in both countries. This is just an illustration of maize yield over time in the two countries. And we can see the two countries are down here, Zimbabwe and Kenya, where the mean productivity is quite lower than their regional averages, especially now for Zimbabwe. Yeah, it's quite below, and both countries, it's less than 2 tons per hectare. The two countries also have some similarity. I think they face climatic change, issues. Yeah, as I had highlighted, we used households that are hosting on-farm trials in the On-Farm Select project in Kenya and Zimbabwe. And we collected this data in 2013 after the harvest. Normally, once the farmers, they plant the maize varieties in the trials, the data collection is done in different phases, especially in the trials. But then being the first year, we also wanted to understand about these households, collect socioeconomic information and other livelihood, and also to understand how they have been doing maize cultivation. So we did most of our study in Western Kenya, and in Zimbabwe is quite a little bit of districts covered there. And also in Kenya, we were in Embu and Kirinyaga. So we collected a total of 600 data from 600 households. These are maize producing households. And most of the people who were interviewed were women, and we also interviewed female. We considered both
Emily? Can others hear her or is only me?
I think we lost her.
We have lost her.
Yeah.
Can't hear.
Is there somebody who shares office with her so that we can check what happened? Or we have
Yes,
to be-
she's joining.
Michael or Vijesh, do you have the presentation that Emily was sharing?
Yeah, I have the presentation. Yeah, we can share, but the thing is that somebody
needs to present.
there's a co-authors sitting
Maybe
here.
I share with her the office. Maybe she can
She
continue
can join, I
present
think.
from my
Yeah, okay.
Come, you can come. Yeah, we're going to share.
You are muted, Emily. Think can't hear you. Relax. It's okay.
Is it okay now? Yeah. Ask them if they can hear you. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, we
Yes,
can.
yes.
Sorry for that. And then Michael has to share my presentation because I cannot access my email now. Sorry for that. Just kicked out and I don't know why.
Can you see my screen, everybody?
Yes, Yes.
Okay, please. Here you stopped, Emily, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
we go to the next. Yeah.
Okay, just say next and I will continue.
Yeah, next. Okay, we collected some data from both spouses on decision making, especially in maize production and use of harvest, and also on maize varieties. And there's also some data that we collected from a single spouse, that's food security, household, and also maize production, asset, household composition. Because we realize also asking both spouses, it takes time, and most of these households, we've been visiting them during the season, so we try to cut on the number of questions that we needed to ask. Next. Yeah, for food security, we measured it by food insecurity experience scale, where we asked households about 8 questions on food access, if they lacked resources and they were unable to obtain food, or if they worried, or if they experienced hunger. So we first categorized these categories into 4 categories: that food secure, mild, moderate, and severe food insecurity. But then for our analysis, we then recategorize the households into 2 categories: households that experience moderate and severe food insecurity, and households who are food secure. And for maize yields, we consider the non-experimental fields, and we measured it in kilograms per hectare. Next. Yeah, for women empowerment, we try to follow the KEBA's framework, and he defines women empowerment in 3 components: that the resources, agency, and achievement. So I try to indicate the measures that we use here, and our measure of women empowerment is more on decision making, the agency part, and we measure empowerment, but by measures such as women decision in maize production, whether sole or joint, and also women participation in decision making in utilization of maize harvest. The resources, women ownership of assets, I put them as preconditions of empowerment, and for our outcome, we use household food security and maize yields. There are limitations, I think, to these measures of empowerment, as I've highlighted, as Agnes published a publication last year, and he highlighted why decision making may not be a good measure of agency, because it's more than that. It's also on freedom on making choices for one's own goal. So we will explain further. Next. Yeah, for empirical framework, I use propensity score matching to show the association between women empowerment and household food security. And since we can also show the first stage results where we highlight the determinants of women empowerment, I also present the results. And then for second stage, that's where we show the average treatment effect on the treated, which is the difference between the outcome variable in the treated group and the counterfactual. We also run different balanced diagnostic to see if the quality of matching was, if the matching was successful. And because, you know, there might be some unobservables that PS propensity score matching does not control, we interpret our estimate as association, not causal. Next. These are some of the descriptive statistics between Zimbabwe and Kenyan households, and there are quite some differences. We can see, especially on migration, where migration in Zimbabwe is a bit high. We asked the household if the male migrated for some time in the household, and around 20% in Zimbabwe indicated that, compared to 12% in Kenya, and the differences were statistically significant. We also see differences in ownership of ox plow. In Zimbabwe, almost 84% of the household indicated to have ownership compared to Kenya. And also farm sizes and maize area were higher in Zimbabwe and Kenya, in Zimbabwe than Kenya. For Kenya, it's more off-farm type of employment was higher than in Zimbabwe. Next. Yeah, we show for spousal education differences between also the two countries, and we see in Zimbabwe, okay, for the whole sample generally, spouses had similar education levels, but in Zimbabwe we see a quite higher percentage, and for Kenya we see like a wife having higher education, a higher proportion of household, you know, than in Zimbabwe, almost 20% for Kenya. And for women asset ownership, also it was high. Women ownership of at least 3 groups of asset. We collected data on so many assets, almost 30, but then we grouped them into 9 groups. And we see women owning a lot of assets, either jointly or sole ownership. And even for large livestock, which is almost 60% on average. Next. For maize production decisions, women are quite engaged in maize production decisions. As we can see from both men and women responses, we considered even the locations of the fields, and we can see in home fields, women are engaged. Almost 80% of women are engaged in those fields as well as outfields. And even in Kenya, we can see that women are engaged in maize production. Even when we look at men responses, it's similar to that, even though now it's a little bit less than 80%. And normally we see these differences when we interview men and women separately, because women sometimes will try to claim power and men also try to claim power when you're asking them. And there's some level of also agreement. So it's a common pattern. Next. In maize harvest use decision, also women participate quite a lot, and there's a little bit higher even than 80% if we look at both women and men responses. And for harvest that is from home fields and outfields is also the same. Next. Yeah, for food security and maize productivity, we see quite a bit of difference here between the two countries. On average, 42% of the households indicated they were food insecure, but then in Kenya, almost 60% as compared to Zimbabwe, which is only 20% of the households experience food insecurity. And the similar trend is observed on maize productivity, which is a bit high in Zimbabwe if we consider both home fields and outfields as compared to Kenya. But in both countries, the yield average was less than 2 tons per hectare in the dual adult households. Next. So these are some of the empirical results. In stage 1, we try to see the determinants of women participation in decision, and we highlight both production and harvest decision. This is for the pooled sample, but I consider also women and men responses, and we can see a few factors were actually determined. they determined the women participation in decision-making, especially ownership of large livestock, which increased women participation in decisions, both production and harvest. Farm size on the other sides was negatively correlated with women participation in harvest use decision in particular, which means women in poorer households. If we take farm size as a measure of wealth, women in poorer households are the ones that participated more in decision making. And a male being a migrant also was correlated with women participation in decision, especially in production decision, which the effect is more significant than the harvest use decision. Next. And in this result, now we show the association between women empowerment and food. This is food insecurity because one is food insecure. So we expect if women empowerment was positively associated with food security, we'll expect a negative here because one is the food insecure. So we find that women participation in maize harvest use decision was negatively associated with food insecurity. And we see some significant effect in Kenya and negative effect throughout. But then the results are not consistent when we look at the main responses where we do not see any significant effect. And for maize production decision, we do not see a consistent pattern here if really women empowerment as measured by those variables was associated with food security. Next. Yeah, so we also, way forward, I'm looking forward to estimating the relationship between women empowerment and maize productivity so that we can see if we have similar results here. And then next is just a summary of what we've observed, that some of the variables actually were correlated with the women participation in decision-making in maize harvest and produce and maize produce use, especially asset ownership, which was positive, women asset ownership, which is positively correlated with decision-making. But then household farm size was negatively associated with the women participation in decision-making. We also observed that there's some evidence in reduction in food insecurity in Kenya when women participate in harvest use decision, but the results are not consistent, they are inconsistent. So based on this result, we conclude that women decision-making does not necessarily lead to improved household welfare outcomes. Perhaps it's critical also to empower women across various spheres beyond maize farming. And also maybe the need to capture the multiple dimension of empowerment. Yeah, we had challenges, of course, to do data. We could not implement the whole Women Empowerment in Agriculture Index, but perhaps this could have given us a good picture. And also perhaps use of longitudinal data, because my results are just based on cross-sectional data and we cannot see the changes, in women empowerment and attribute it to the food security. So we acknowledge the limitation and we hope that your comments will be helpful in contributing to this work. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much, Emily, for the presentation. And now, Agnes, you would like to come first or you would like to open the...
Sure.
Please.
I would like to come first because I actually have prepared comments. But so let me try to start my video, and it is not behaving. Wait. It doesn't matter whether you see me or not, as long as you can hear me, right?
Yeah, we can.
Yeah.
We can
Yeah.
see you.
So thank you so much, Emily, for your presentation and to the team for all their work on this. I think that it's obviously an early stage of research, and so that means that it's good that this is a good time to get feedback from people. So one of the things that I'd like to mention, and you do mention it, is that your empowerment variable is actually a decision-making variable, which is only one of the dimensions of empowerment. And I would encourage you to use that as what you talk about, because I'm seeing, so I'm speaking as an editor of, a co-editor of a journal and also somebody who reviews a lot. I see that many people are using the term women's empowerment very loosely, but they're actually only measuring decision making. But that's not bad. I would rather say, I would rather the paper be very very honest about what it's measuring and say, we're looking at the effects or the correlations between women's decision making in maize and food security. So that's just, and one reason that I say that also is that if you go to slide 5, your table 1, you have a whole range of empowerment measures, but not all of them are actually empowerment measures. So you might want to, you may want to sort of be clear about what the variables are. Because, for example, I know the Duflo and Udry article is not a measure, does not use women's empowerment as a measure of, I mean, the measure they use is not a measure of women's empowerment. The DOS article doesn't use a measure of women's empowerment. So you might want to maybe put in a footnote. I mean, I'm assuming at some point you want to submit this to a journal. You may want to put a footnote or just asterisk and say what measures are actually being used, because there are so many measures in the literature, and I think it's just good to be very clear about what you're using. Okay. Now, as you go to the definition of your variables, I noticed that you use the food insecurity experience score or scale, which is actually it's a discrete variable with 4 categories, and I think you're losing some variation by just changing it from food insecure and not insecure. I think you need to look at the you sort of look at the distribution only of the 0, 1, but it would be interesting to look at the distribution of the 1, 2, 3, 4. And this might actually give you more precise or clearer results when you do your estimation, because you're looking at a range and not just 0 to 1. So do that as a different specification. Figure 5 could probably work better as a pie chart rather than as a bar chart. If you have percentages and they all add up to 100, I think it's easier to interpret this as a pie chart. Okay, so I'm now going to go to the meat of your paper, which is the regression results. I think that your first stage regression, where you estimate the propensity score, is actually very interesting, this one. And I think that as you write the paper, especially since you're looking at men's and women's responses, it will be very interesting to explore whether there are some variables which move men's responses the same way, men's and women's responses the same way, and some variables which don't move men's and women's responses the same way. So yeah, so that, sort of maybe unpacking that a little bit more. And then in your next variable, in your next table where you're looking at the second stage, as I mentioned earlier, try to look at this when you're looking at the range of food insecurity measure, or the food insecurity measures, to see whether your results, whether you get more action from that. I do think that I wouldn't be so disappointed that you're getting inconsistent results. This is very common for papers that are looking at women's empowerment or decision-making outcomes, especially if they cover sort of different spheres of decision-making. I think different aspects of decision-making are involved in production, and different spheres of decision-making are involved in harvesting, because I think production decisions have a lot to do with who controls assets on the farm and within the house, whereas harvest has to do like who is better equipped to deal with the market and things like that. So it would be very nice to unpack that, especially if you have some qualitative results. So I'm going to end here and say that this is very promising work, and I'd like I would be very excited to see the results as you continue the study. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Agnes. Emily, would you like to respond to some of the comments?
Okay, thank you, Agnes, for those informative suggestions and comments. Yeah, for me, I'll just take them as comments to improve the paper. And I'll try to also include what you suggested. I agree. When I was doing the table 1, it could have been better to really indicate what these people are measuring. That's why I indicated initially these are some of the indicators, but it might not be like, women empowerment as you've described, but some of the indicators that describe, the process of women empowerment. Yeah, the rest of the comments are okay. I'm okay with them. I'll not comment there because of time, but I'll try to look into that. Yeah, and as you suggested, it will be good to share with you the paper once I do most of these revisions. Thank you so much for your comments.
Thank you, Emily. The floor is open for discussion. Any questions? Please come.
There's a
No.
hand, Chris.
There is a hand, Vijesh, Chris.
Okay, I can't see. That's why. Okay.
Maybe I just unmute and ask the question, Vijesh.
Yeah, please ask. Yeah.
Thank you. And thank you so much, Emily, for the presentation. I want to first maybe refer to the comment made by Maureen about collecting data at household level versus collecting data at the level of individuals within a household, and circle it back to several years when we were based with Maureen in Malawi. I remember her emphasis from the care side was that you empower women, you need actually to also address the needs of men, because the household does not have women alone. Well, at least looking at that type of household, but it has men and women, and it required that you address both for you to be able to empower the other. And that was a successful way of approaching women empowerment. And coming to your conclusion, you indicate that empowering women does not actually lead to household livelihood outcomes or impact, so to say. Would you think that perhaps one of the reasons why you're coming to this conclusion is because you've addressed women as an absolute factor and ignored the fact that women coexist with men in that same household, and perhaps there was a need to look at men either as a potential counterfactual when you're looking at women, or whatever the approach you want to call it. But I say, this is what happens when you address the needs of men, and this is what happens when you address the needs of women, and this is what happens when you pull them together. And then you see, look at what eventually happens at household level, having a comparison across male, female responses. Over.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Yeah, if I understood, collecting data at household level and including both men and women in this data collection exercise. I think this is what we did with our data. We collected information from both men and women. And for both men and women, we could ask who makes decision. Okay, at least for my empowerment indicators, I would say the participation of men, participation of women in decision making. We could ask men, both men and women, who makes decisions in this household. So they would say it's either male male alone or female alone or joint. And in the regression, when I run, like, for my outcome variables, I think we are comparing now households with women who are empowered, like women are making the decisions, and then with those ones that are not making the decision. A household is, women are empowered if they participate in the decision, and they are not if the man alone is participating in decision making. I think that's how I would approach your question. I don't know if I understood or if I have tried to answer it, but I agree they coexist, men and women. And I think that's why when we talk about gender transformative approaches, we are actually advocating for having mixed gender groups so that we can address challenges when all these people are at the table, so that they can we explain to the males why it's important for women to make decisions in several spheres, and also how they can contribute to the household welfare, especially if you're talking to at household level. So we are not leaving men outside. At least for this study, I would say we were not leaving men outside. And even as Michael says, even gender roles in maize production, we also try to find who participates, like who works in the farm. It can be either male alone, female alone, or joint management. So I think that's basically what we are doing. We were not living here. I think that's what I would stress, because even, when you are going to the households and you want to talk to women alone, even men will be like, what do you want to talk, to the women alone. So we try to include both men and women in the conversation, but we interviewed them separately so that they can give us their genuine responses.
Excellent, thanks.
Anybody else? Please talk directly and we can see. The hands are hardly visible for me.
Yes, hi, I have my hand up. Thank you. This is Michael speaking. Thank you very much, Emily, for this very nice presentation. Yeah, I was also involved during this project, doing the data collection as well, and thank you also, Agnes, for your comments. I think they're all very well received and they all make a lot of sense to me. This is maybe a comment or maybe also a question also to Agnes. We do have regarding this, okay, it's not empowerment, it's about decision making that we're really measuring here. We do have additional data. I think this is also an element of the women's empowerment module of the full one, which is more about the motivation, women's motivation for decision making, where you tell different stories about the type of crops women grow to consume and to sell, and about taking crops to the market. So basically there's 4 different stories, and I think you know that very well, Agnes, but maybe for the audience, it's one is more like you're a resource constrained person. The things you do because that's basically your only option your environment gives you. Then the second story is like what you do, what is expected basically from your husband or from your immediate, from your husband, from your spouse, partner. The third story, you do what is like, let's say, community norms, family norms expect you to do that. That's what you do. And the last story is like, I do what I want to do, because it's my decision. So I think we could also use, maybe if we look at food security, and you explained very well, Agnes, that this is not only related to the decision-making regarding maize, but there's a lot more. There may be many other fields where households take decisions that then in the end affect the level of food security. So maybe this type of motivation stories could be used also as in alternative models. I don't know, maybe Agnes, you could say something. I'm sure you have done that before. Thank you.
Sure, let me just jump in. I'm really glad you have the autonomy and the motivation indicators. And if you do have data on the non-maize plots, it would be great to see how that correlates with your food security indicator, because I mean, as we know, food security is not only based on one crop, even if it's the crop that CIMMYT is very interested in. So yeah, go if you have the data, go ahead. I think there's a lot more that you can do in this paper. Thanks, Michael.
Thank you, Mike. Who else now?
Vijesh, if I can come in quickly to
Yeah.
first of all thank Emily for a great presentation, and Agnes for the analysis, especially I mean for her views, especially around the fact that we should be clear when we are talking about different variables on women's empowerment, and in this case it's decision making, and so we can continue to look at that as we conduct our research and as we develop our publications. I also meant to clarify actually that my point on the data collection, I think Emily mentioned in her literature review, she found that there was very little data both in Kenya and in Zimbabwe, and most of it, was on at household level. And so I was really glad to note that I wrote another text in there, but I don't know where it disappeared to note that this study actually did consider both men and women's views, and just like did collect data from men and women, and just like Agnes has noted, it's really great to see the autonomy and motivation indicators. So thank you so much.
Emily, shall I ask my question now?
You can ask your question. Thank you.
Thank you. So we are doing similar work in India, and we always find the negative effect, mainly with the anxiety. The farmers are actually those people who are in charge of the decisions. They get more anxious about the food security situation in the households, both men and women. But other aspect may be interesting for this case to explicitly address the heterogeneity of effects. Sometimes it could be completely different effect of empowerment on food security based on, say, age groups or landholding size, or in case of India, it's caste. So have you explored that direction, or do you think that will be useful?
Yeah. Yeah, I haven't explored that, but I can look into that and see if there are differences in that.
Yeah, we could find two type of relationship among young and old women. So the association is completely different. So we got a somewhat insignificant result when we took the overall thing together. Yeah, just suggestion. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I'll get back to you. We can discuss further about and learn what was also done in the other paper. Thank you so much for the comment.
Can I ask a follow-up, Vijesh?
Yes, sir.
So you looked basically at the heterogeneity by caste and by age?
Yeah, we made the groups based on age, but again, we are struggling to validate the groups by where we should put the limit for being young, being old. But that's something that we are working out now. But caste, yes, caste, marginalized and non-marginalized castes.
Great, thank you. Sounds interesting.
Any other questions? Please come on.
May I ask a question, Vijesh?
Certainly, Moti.
Yeah, thank you, Emily and team, for this great work. Maybe I missed because I just started, joined late in this presentation. But my question is, the decision-making or empowerment made at the production level might be influenced or the use decision might be influenced by the production decisions, because somebody who decides on the production might be also influencing the utilization. Maybe if we have looked at the best outcome in terms of food security or better off of the household, if the decision is made both at the production and utilization all together by one or joint group in the household.
Yes, Monty, thanks so much. I didn't think about that, but actually it would be good to see if women participation both at production and utilization does have an effect on food security, as you've suggested. I didn't do this, but it will be good to see if the person who consistently made production decision and consistently also made the utilization decision, if it has an impact on. I will explore that and add that into the paper. Thanks.
Thank you, Emily.
If there's no one else, I can come in quickly, please.
Please.
Yeah, that's such a great point by Moti, and I'm glad, Emily, that you can include that. To Agnes's point around food security, and to Chris's point on engaging men as well in household decision making is important for both the production and the utilization. So I think that's going to be a very interesting data point to see how both men and women are involved in both production decisions and utilization, because we should be moving more towards involving men in household nutrition decision making, for both food security and of course for the households and nutrition. Thanks.
Are there any other questions or comments? I assume there are none. Thank you very much, Emily, for the wonderful talk, and thank you everybody for the discussion. And if there are any suggestions that you would like to discuss or suggest to Emily, please reach out to her. Thank you very much, Agnes, for again coordinating this fourth talk in this particular series. Your comments are much appreciated. Yes, I'm really thankful that you are here, because I am the next one to present in the last week of November. So thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
And bye.
Thank you.